me? Yeah. If I can just cut across conversation. Welcome, everyone, and good evening. So my name is Professor Linda King, and I'm honoured to be the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Global Partnerships here at Oxford Brookes. And I'm really delighted to welcome you all here this evening to our Healthy Aging and Care Network open lecture. This is to be delivered by Professor Roy Sandbach, and it's entitled Need for a National Independent Living Strategy for Our Aging Population. And after the lecture, there will be a panel discussion chaired by Dr. Jo Brett of our School of Nursing and Midwifery. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to our panelists, who include Penny Hewlis, who is Chief Executive of Age UK Oxfordshire, so welcome. Dr. Paul Jackson, who's Senior Lecturer in our Business School, welcome Paul. Dr. Johnny Collett, who's Senior Lecturer in Clinical Exercise and Rehabilitation. Johnny, welcome. And I'm really sorry to say that Dr. Melanie Henward has COVID, that's still around, and is not able to join us this evening. We wish her a full and speedy recovery, but we're really delighted that the panel is joined by Margaret Simpson, who is not only the chair of Oxford 50+ Network, but also a really highly valued member of our Healthy Aging and Care Network steering group. So Margaret, welcome. Okay, I think it was on actually. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
It won't matter for me because I've got one.
Yeah.
So sorry.
It goes off.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, well done. Okay. So we're not expecting a fire drill. So in the event of a fire alarm, you do need to leave either by the exits at the top or you need to go out to London Road or Headington Road, which is our assembly point. If you've not already done so, can you switch off your mobile phone or put it onto silent? So thank you. And we're expecting the lecture and panel session to last for about an hour and a half, and there will be time for questions at the end. As we are recording this evening's lecture through our lecture capture system, and that's so it can be viewed online afterwards for those that weren't able to join us this evening. So when it comes to questions, we'll be using the microphone. So raise your hand and then someone will come over with the microphone so that we can record your question. So now let me say a little bit about this evening's speaker. So from 2015 until September 2018, Professor Sandbach was the first director of the National Innovation Centre for Aging at Newcastle University. He sits on the Parliamentary Advisory Board for Longevity and is a Technology Services Association board member. He has recently chaired the National Inquiry into Technology for Our Aging Population, which is developing a benchmark for what good looks like in technology for housing and care. In addition, he sits on the advisory board for the UK All-Parliamentary Group for Longevity, and he's also the vice chair of Sunderland Aging Well Board. In 2017, Professor Sandbach was honoured with an OBE for services to science, innovation and skills. We're really delighted that he's accepted our invitation to join us tonight. So please join me in giving Professor Roy Sandbach a really warm welcome. Thank you.
I don't need that one on. So, okay. Super, thanks. Right. Let me just get sorted out. Right, we're ready. Yeah, I think so. Good. Right. Thank you so much, by the way, for the introduction. So first of all, let me check. Can you hear me? Good. Let me check something else. Good evening, everyone. That's excellent. Now I need a response, okay? The only way this works for someone like me is if there's some form of interaction. And in fact, if there isn't any, then what I'll do is I'll just stay on this first chart, okay? Which I don't think you'd want me to do that. Given, frankly, some of the rather interesting stuff that's on some of the other charts. So look, it's an absolute pleasure to be back in Oxford. I have never actually studied here or indeed researched here, but I do have a lot of friends here. Neither this prestigious university nor indeed the other one have ever bothered with me in an academic sense. So it's great to be here. Indeed, I've got plenty of friends who are around the place. I just wanted to say a couple of things before I actually start with this topic. But one of them is a very serious point that I want to make. And the other one is something that happened to me today. The serious point is that what we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit about the questions that exist for our aging society with predominantly a national view. Now, the aging society issue is one that is predominantly a first world issue, if you really think about it. In fact, if you look at the demographics elsewhere in the world, let's take Ivory Coast, or Ghana, or Togo, or Chad. The median age in those countries is around 18. Okay, so they don't really have the kind of issues or questions that we're going to address tonight. In addition, around the rest of the world, right now, there are not issues of aging and how we age healthily, but issues of traumatic life and death that are happening. And I just thought it was worth me just putting that kind of perspective on this subject. Issues in Turkey and Syria, we all know about. In the past few days, there have been some truly dreadful things happening in Peru as well, where there have been landslides and a lot of floods. So this is a first world issue. And while it's important for us to address it in the context of the globe, it's perhaps not quite as serious as some of those life and death issues that we're seeing right now. As more importantly for me, I'm going to share with you an issue I had today, and I want your help. I came via London, and when I walked to the station in London, there were 2 cars stopped in order to let me across the road. Now I need to ask you, I'm going to do a quick poll here, okay? That was either because suddenly Londoners have become kind, or, and I don't want you to, I'm not going to bias you here, or somehow that I look a lot older than I am. So which of those do you think it is? Do you think it's the first one? They've all become kind. Thank you so much. Right, look, I'll keep going then. All right, I'll keep going. Anyway, there we go. So the first thing is, it was a lovely introduction, but I'm going to just give you a little bit more background. First of all, I am a scientist, so I'm a chemist. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was giving a keynote on sustainable polymers, which is a subject that I'm sure that you're not very interested in tonight. So I know that that's DNA. And in fact, that's my DNA. And on my DNA, there are 2 mutations on a couple of the chromosomes, mainly the manly chromosomes. One of them is to do with disappointment, and the other one is to do with optimism. And I know that because I know that my optimistic part of my DNA is working tonight And that's because my football team is playing in a replay of an FA Cup tie tonight. Normally, I'm very disappointed, but tonight I'm optimistic. And they'll win tonight because I'm not there. We all know that. And so that's my scientific background, is that I'm a chemist by training, and I spent most of my primary career as a research and development director in a major multinational. That major multinational was called Procter & Gamble, and I show this chart for one. This gives you my business credibility. I just want to share with you the fact that I did join Procter & Gamble about here, right? Got it? And I left Procter & Gamble way up here, in fact, beyond 2008 by a few years. And you can attribute the whole of that growth to me. All right? That's my business credibility. I know that's true, by the way, because see that bit there? I went on holiday. And I had, in fact, this bit here, I had a weekend off. They really worked it very, very hard in Procter & Gamble. But seriously, what I'm going to do tonight is give you a perspective, which is not an academic perspective. It's the perspective of a businessman, actually, who's moved through various stages of life and bounced off issues and questions that have been addressed through different lenses, which include business, include academia, and indeed include the public sector in lots of ways, because I have the privilege of having worked voluntarily with some very critical public sector groups in regions of the country. So anyway, that's my background. Okay, right, we're going to start with, I'm going to do about half an hour, I think. And I'm going to try not to bring you too many charts and stats with plots and bar charts and stuff like that. What I'm going to do is try to take you through a series of snapshots of things that are happening or will happen, and which give you insight into, or at least they give me insight into, the issues and opportunities that exist for us in the context of our aging population. Then what I'll do is I'll give you just my personal view on things that can be done. There'll be some controversy in this. That there are all sorts of complex issues that exist, and almost domino effects that exist in the context of aging and dealing with that space. Inevitably, it can be controversial. I'll talk about some real people first, and then we'll talk about the big picture of what's needed and what's possible from the point of view of managing what's happening to us as a population. And I'm going to give you an optimistic view, because my optimistic DNA is working perfectly tonight. At least it will until about 9 o'clock. These three things will take you through on a journey, really, but a journey with lots and lots of different aspects to it. Real people, real questions. So I want to just mention, and this is to set the scene. I'm going to mention three people, S, R, and G. So S is Susan, R is Richard, and G is Jill. And let me just tell you a little bit about them. And you need to know about these three people, because they identify for us some of the issues that exist in the context of life as we get older. So S is now 94, and she lived independently, completely independent, until about a year ago, when her family identified that she was forgetting things, and she was in the early stages of dementia at that point, at the age of 93. Now, I know her director of adult social services, and he, of course, she had never ever been on his radar for anything at all. She's an owner-occupier. She is someone who is both resilient and completely independent. She had no help with the bins. She didn't have anybody coming around to see her. And as far as the system was concerned, she didn't exist really. Suddenly, however, for her director of adult social care in that city, she's become very expensive. For lots and lots of reasons, she's become expensive on resource and expensive on money. Too late is Roy's view. Far, far too late. All sorts of bits of stuff, by the way. Her family tried to get into her house and her living space. They had no idea what they were doing. And frankly, the bits of the social services environment which engaged with them were siloed, fragmented, and only knew bits about the overarching issues of maintaining her independently in her home. I should say, by the way, that she is now in hospital because she fell. And we all know what that pathway is. She fell, she's in hospital as we speak, and it is highly likely that she will not end up going back to her home. Highly likely. So that's one. Richard, he's about 70, and he lives independently. He lives independently, and he doesn't live with anybody. It's a very interesting fact that the number of over 70s men who are living completely alone has gone up by 67% since the year 2000. Right? That just bear with me on some of these numbers, but these are really interesting and important demographic things that are happening. He lives alone. He has absolutely no care support, but equally, he has nothing in his house that helps his care at all. He has an upstairs, he has stairs, and he's a little bit worried about what's going to happen here. By the way, he has one blood test a year from the NHS. That's your lot. And there's a very reactive thing that goes on here. If he doesn't go, they don't do anything. He doesn't have any private health insurance. And his family live a distance away. So there's a gap, right? So there's a gap for S and there's a gap for R. R, by the way, is S's son. G, Jill. Jill is R's daughter. And she's in her 40s, and she's had her ups and downs with her health. However, and by the way, she does sort of intermittent physical exercise, so she sort of gets into it and then doesn't. She has not engaged in any way with her aging future. So she doesn't know that in about 15 to 20 years' time, she doesn't have any children. There are quite a lot of women who were born around that time who will come into their late 60s without any dependent children or children who would otherwise care for them. She doesn't realize what that future looks like. And she's doing absolutely nothing in her current lifestyle to manage in a positive way, health for herself as she moves into her 50s. And I'll come back to this, the 50 to 64 cohort in a minute. And so there's a gap there. So S, R, and G, just a gap, just gaps all over the place. And so my thought that it is absolutely true that there are many, many people working in their own siloed environments in the context of making life better and longer as people get older. But the problem is there's no strategic coherence to this. None. Absolutely none. And look, I've talked to many people about it, but there isn't any at the national level. There's some, and an increasing amount at the local, city region, rural level, but it's bitty, and it definitely isn't best practice replicable. So that's my starting point to you. These are real people with real issues where there's no strategy. And I personally think that's a disgrace, because this is one of our biggest challenges in the country, alongside climate change. It's rolling at us. I mean, it's not as if this is not happening. And now let me share some things with you that will just show you that. Demographics matter. This is Danny Dorling's book. He's an Oxford man, and he's written this fantastic book, Why Demography Matters. And I use it a lot. It's quite old now, but I use it a lot. I'm not going to share with you lots of charts, but I am going to share with you some numbers. I think we probably all know that there are around 12 million people who are over 65 now in the country. And by about 2050, it will be 20 million. So that's 8 million, right? Just imagine, by the way, a city the size of London filled with old people. Because over the next 25 years, that's what we're going to get. Just bear with me on it. We're going to get a city level of a London city level of extra older people. And what we're doing? Not a lot. But it's not worse than that. It's much better to examine this through the lens of even older people. By 2038-ish, there'll be 3 million over 85s. And believe me, they, at that point, will have needed a strategy for aging, which keeps them living independently with a degree of care, probably, but living independently at home. Because if we don't deal with that, the system that we have by 2038, 2035, 2038 will have completely collapsed. There are that represents about 4%, 4.5% of the population. Currently, it's around 2%, 2.5%. I should tell you, by the way, that by 2060, over 85s will represent 7% of the population. 7% of the population will be over 85 by 2060. Now, it might sound a long way away, but honestly, it isn't. It isn't. It's like doing a climate change thing, saying it's going to be, what, 2.5 degrees in 2070. By 2060, it's going to be 3 million over 85s, 7% of the population. Much quicker than that, by 2042, 1 in 4 of the population will be over 65. So 25% of our population will be over 65 by 2042. That's only 20 years away. So we better work on this now. We've got to work on it now. In fact, this is a crisis that is a quick crisis that we've got to deal with. But that doesn't tell the story. The real insight for me, and this is one I'd like you to sort of embed with you, is this one. So this group is not the over 65s. It's arguable, by the way, that on the over 65 and over 85s groups, hey, we've got what we've got, and we've got to manage it in a sort of pragmatic manner. But this group, we're going to get something pretty grim with the 56 to 64 group. There are around, just as there are 12 million over 65s, there are around 12 million between 50 and 64. 3.6 million of them are economically inactive. And you've probably heard in the past few weeks about that number going up. That's a very short-term thing, but let's just bear with me on the 3.6 million. That's a lot of people. It's 27.4% of that total cohort. When those people are asked why are they economically inactive, there are three reasons that are predominant reasons. 40% of them are sick. So of a third of the population between 50 and 64, of that third, nearly a half of them are sick. That's why they're not working. 33% of them have decided to retire. And they've retired. If you look at the quals and the quants quantitative analysis among that group, it's because, frankly, they've had enough. Their working lives, their working practices have had too much stress in them. They've decided to retire. They've got plenty of money. Many of them have got private pensions. So they're retiring well before 65, 66, 67. 14% say that they've retired or they can't work because of care. Now, all three of those questions, there's no addressing of those questions right now. There's no strategy to address those questions. My point on the National Independent Living Strategy is that if we're going to have one of those, then we better focus on this group, because there is a train of issues coming along with that community. That's an insight for you that I have, which maybe you think is irrelevant or not so important to the way we deal with our aging population, but it's something that it's a gap. There's gaps all over the place here. Now, I'm not going to depress you with the health numbers, but I'm going to show you some. Right, I just need to explain these numbers. See these two numbers here? These two numbers are longevity at birth. Bear with me on these numbers, because there are quite a lot of different numbers you could use, but just bear with me because I just want to show some of the differences that exist. So 79.4 and 76.6, I'll explain the difference of those two in a minute, but that's longevity at birth. And that number there is healthy lifespan. So the bottom line here is that in the UK, longevity at birth is around 79.4 for men. It's 83 and 84 for women, but stick with men for a minute. 79.4 for men, and it's 63.1 of healthy lifespan. So essentially, men are living around 16 years with some form of what we'd call some form of morbidity, some kind of disability of some kind. It doesn't need to be a serious disability, by the way, but they've got some form of disability. So I certainly have one, because I've got high blood pressure, which is managed. So that would be, I'd be, not healthy in that context. I should also say that see, there's an issue, and I'm going to just describe a big issue here. That number there is for men. Now, if I put the women's numbers up here, the women's numbers would be 84, roughly, and 61. Now then, remarkably, in the past 10 to 15 years, remarkably, healthy lifespan for women has dropped like a stone. And in fact, if that's the curve for men, that's the curve for women. They're below men now in terms of healthy lifespan. What's going on? Why are we not absolutely crazily up in arms about the way in which some things are impacting on women's health to a serious degree over the last 20 years compared to men, but for both groups, it's frankly a disaster. Now, these two numbers are in the city that I called home for when I was very young. So I grew up in Sunderland. These are the numbers for Sunderland and men. Okay, so a little bit less in longevity, but a bucket load less in terms of healthy lifespan. And you walk around Sunderland city centre, you walk around Blackpool city town centre, walk around Rochdale, Oldham, Middlesbrough, and you look at whether you can see that. You definitively can see it. And my view, by the way, is if we were going to level up, you know what we'd be leveling up with? Two places. We'd be leveling up in that context, and we'd be leveling up on early years. And the rest, all this garbage about building stuff in high streets and all this stuff, no, you deal with that and you deal with the early years. And that's real leveling up because it's long term and it makes a huge difference in the places that need it. Now, that to my mind shows you where we need to build this strategy. The 50-64 group, and you need to build a healthy lifespan. Now, where does it come from? Well, Sally Davis, who was the CMO before Chris Whitty, there was one before Chris Whitty. This is what she said: 50% of the disease burden in England is due to 4 modifiable health behaviors. Now, I've showed 2 of them. Well, I've showed 2 that are actually related to each other. By 2030, approximately 5 million people in the country will have diabetes. It's going up like a train. Already today, 28% of the population is obese or overweight. And for men, it's about 35%. Okay, so it's a bit less for women. What I've shown you here, by the way, is one of the reasons why a strategy is so important. You see, you could say, well, this is all to do with food. Well, yes, and let's be critical of everybody who produces processed food and sells it to us with huge amounts of salt, huge amounts of sugar. Let's be critical of Nestle and Cadbury and all of these people. Yeah, sure, let's be critical of them. But let's also be critical of the planners. Because I'm going to give you an example here. There is a suburb of Newcastle which has a longevity of around 87. And there's another suburb which has a longevity of around 59. And you can get to them on the metro. So you go from one to the other. In this one, if you take the main cross-section where the traffic lights are, and you look at the number of fast food joints that are within 100 meters of that cross-section, there's one. If you look at this same cross-section in this other place with the lower longevity, and you look at how many fast food joints are within 100 meters of those traffic lights, the answer is 12. Right. What are the planners doing here? What's going on? Well, the answer is they're not doing anything because there's no strategy to do something. There shouldn't be 12. There shouldn't be. Well, people will say, well, that's all poor people who live there can afford. Absolute garbage. There's huge strategic intervention that can be made in the context of good food, which is just not being made because there's no strategy. Right. The other 2 things, by the way, smoking. We're doing pretty well on smoking. It's about 14% of the population now. We're doing pretty badly on alcohol, where it's over 30% still, who drink between 14 and 40 units a week. Just not good. But there's a hidden issue which has not yet hit us, but which is very obvious, and that is nitrogen dioxide and pollution and the impact on health. But she didn't mention that because the data is not brilliant yet, but it will be soon. And of course, I won't go through this one. It's quite a lot of detail here, but suffice to say that these are quintiles, okay? And the quintile 1 is the most deprived quintile, and you can see the additional costs that relate to that quintile in terms of NHS costs. They're awful. The numbers are just awful. If you were a finance director in an NHS trust, you'd know this. They're pretty grim. So what happens then? Well, we know what happens. 30% of over 65s fall. They don't have any upper body strength. You know, they've not done very much physical exercise, which I didn't mention there, but They've been ill between 50 and 64. Lots of them have been ill, and then they fall over and they go into hospital, and frailty costs 5.8 billion to the NHS. And by the way, if you go in when you're very old, like S, then you never come out. In addition, it's quite expensive. I don't like to deal with money much, but in this context, it's quite interesting. So this gentleman is 45. If he goes across the doors of a hospital, generally speaking, he's in there to the cost of 500 quid. But if this gentleman, who's 65, goes across the threshold of a hospital, it's highly likely that he'll be in there to the cost of 2,000 quid. So we are talking about a massive cost in the system, which is a consequence of not dealing with the potential problems that we have earlier than pensionable age. On hospitals, well, briefly, 209,000 number of beds in our NHS hospitals in 2007. 157,000 is the current number. So we've lost about 25% of our beds in hospitals. At a time when the aging population is aging, I mean, what the heck's going on? Excuse me, it's just horrific. 13,000, that's the current number of people who the popular media would call bed blockers, which is the equivalent of 10 new hospitals. There's roughly 1,300 beds in a decent sized hospital. So if you build 10 hospitals, those 13,000, I mean, it's just awful. So the hospital. Now, if you took the pressure off the hospitals by dealing with the opportunities that exist for healthy aging earlier, with a strategy for independent living and care for the individual, then surely to God, we wouldn't have that problem. And of course, when people come out of hospital, there are currently 165,000 vacancies in social care. People who move in and out of social care very, very frequently. So the people who are in social care as client, they use the word client. It's just an awful thing. You know, I mean, honestly, it's just an awful thing. The client sees different people virtually every week. And particularly, by the way, in the most deprived areas of the country, 165,000 vacancies. What we don't, Dilnot was great. You know, Dilnot's great about but the fact of the matter is we shouldn't have to have this kind of question of how do we pay for social care? We shouldn't have to have that question because we should have more people living independent, happy lives right up to the point of their final decline, in my opinion. Why wouldn't we want that? Housing. Yeah, housing. Right, I'll just say a few things about that because I don't think I've got very long now. I'm sure I haven't got very long. Let me just check. Oh, maybe I'm not done. Oh, sorry, you've got another 5 minutes at least. Now, housing's important, isn't it? Bound to be important if people are living independently. You want them to? Bound to be important. Right. Well, yes. The problem is that if you look at this is the date at which housing was built, okay, in the UK. And I'm not going to be political on this, but it's obvious, isn't it, that a lot of housing in the UK is pretty old. So all of that lot, housing, is at least 40 years old. And a lot of it is still Victorian. Right, well, bear with me on this. Where do over 65s live? In terms of housing, not in terms of place. Well, 80% of them live in their own houses. And they live either independently as an individual or as a couple, and it splits 50-50. 15% live in social housing and 5% live in private rented housing. And this actually, I think this tells you where it's going, but generally speaking, that's how it distributes. And there's a bit of a surprise. of course, that if you look at the over 85s, approximately 86% of them live in their own houses, as S did until a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So the heavy public focus on care homes is relevant, but in reality, if we were to say, where in our system do we wish to examine opportunities for people to live better longer, it is almost exclusively in the context of owner-occupied, independent living. And because that's where people are. The thing is, they don't get much publicity for being there, because first of all, our public services focus on the other 14%, generally speaking, and they're almost hidden from view until it's too late. Now, the other thing is, they don't have an easy access to things that would help them to live independently for longer. If they have some kind of crisis, then it sort of opens up an opportunity for them to talk to occupational therapists and others. But unless they have a crisis, there isn't a sort of preemptive strike on them that allows them, if they've got stairs, to get a stair lift well before they get dementia, don't ever want to use the stair lift, I'm never going to use that. And all of those kinds of things start to happen to them. There's just not enough preemption of the potential issues associated with living longer in your own home, because people are owner occupiers and are hidden from view. You're very welcome to examine the data on this, but it is very clear that that's true. In fact, I've talked to and continue to talk to directors of adult social care, including Sir David Pearson, who's a good friend of mine and who was the chair of ADAS, which is that organization. And the fact is, they have no idea in their locations where those owner occupiers are, what their houses are like, and when they might suffer a crisis. They simply don't know. I love ranting, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but now there's an issue of no, it's more of an opportunity, I think. 19% of our current homes in the UK are deemed non-decent. Okay, government definition of non-decent, and it involves a reasonably modern kitchen, a reasonably modern bathroom, flush, and all of the rest of it. The problem we have is that, you see, of those 19%, 46% of those 19% are occupied by people who are over 65. So we've got an issue of housing. And by the way, there are many issues in housing. All sorts of big social issues in housing. But there's an aging issue in housing, and that is that non-decent housing is occupied to the tune of 50% by old people. It's not a surprise, is it? See those early Victorian houses? Many old people live in those. Certainly many of them live in those 1960s houses where the baby boomers, the baby boomer parents, it was their first house in the sort of late 50s, early 1960s. And nothing's happened in those houses since then. There's no retrofit, and there is definitively no retrofit for age-relevant design. Nothing. Is there a strategy for retrofit? There definitely isn't. So there's no independent living strategy for retrofitting. Now I'm going to briefly talk about money in this context. First of all, 1.9 million pensioners are in poverty. Okay, so they don't have any money. And they're often living at home. They're possibly owner occupiers, by the way, but they're living in poverty because they can't access the money. Our taxpayers, this is called the old age dependency ratio. I won't bore you with it, but it's the number of old people divided by 1,000 taxpayers, and it's going up. It was 281 in 2015. It'll be 364 in 2025. It'll be 419 in 2035. So the dependency of older people on younger people and younger taxpayers, that's increasing, and that's not going to be good. Because the question is, where's the money going to come from for any kind of independent living strategy? The answer, by the way, should probably be we're going to carve out quite a bit that's in the NHS right now. But you know what the NHS is like. You know, it's run by clinicians, and are they going to give money up? I think not. So let's just put that to one side. Where is the money? Well, there's a lot of money here. Okay, this is housing wealth in the UK, 4.6 trillion. This is £1 million house, by the way, in London. This is £1 million house in the northeast of England. I'm not kidding either, by the way. I looked this up on Zoopla. These are Zoopla houses from last week. 1 million, 1 million. Anyway, that's just by the by. The fact of the matter is 4.6 trillion is held in housing wealth. And yet, if I said to somebody who's 55 and who doesn't have a mortgage and has £1 million house, I said, look, any chance of you taking a little bit of equity out of that in order to make your life longer and better over the next 30 years? The answer would be no. And the answer would definitively be no. And the reason is they don't know what's coming, and there's no strategy to tell them what's coming, and there's no market to offer them options on what's coming. So it's just like a bucket load of things that are happening to you. But the bottom line is nobody uses that money to look after themselves for the future. It just doesn't happen. That money, by the way, is not evenly spread. And the worst thing here, by the way, is the places that need healthy living, a healthy lifespan increases are the places that don't have that money. So, so what we've got is 1.6 trillion of that housing wealth is in London, 348 billion is in the southeast of England, and 33 billion is in the northeast of England. Now, I'm not going to get into how we deal with that problem, but the fact is that's what exists. So if there's going to be an inequality, anything happening to inequality over the next 20 years, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to increase. For that obvious, if not for any other reason, for that reason. Because these people will have an opportunity to make themselves live longer with a better life. But again, bet your bottom dollar these people won't. Now, I'm saying that because this is where the money is, okay? I'm a businessman, so I hunt the money. Let's hunt the money. There's money in housing. By the way, there's money in pension funds as well. I'm not going to deal with them now. I could, but I won't. I am going to deal with this, however, because there's 6.1 billion each year coming into the UK government from inheritance tax. That number is going up. In fact, it was about 5.6 billion in 2018, and it's going up quite rapidly now, mainly because baby boomers are dying and they've got houses, and a lot of them are in the southeast of England. 6.1 billion inheritance tax. Where's that money going? Where is that money going? Well, one thing's for sure, it's not going into a national independent living strategy for older people. Not at all, because there isn't one. And neither is the government thinking about using that money in a sort of hypothecated way. Shouldn't we be doing something about that? Some strategic solutions. Well, here what I'm going to do is do my, I'm into innovation, okay? I mean, I'm a bit of a fraud when it comes to all of this stuff on aging and indeed anything to do with academia. But innovation for me is matching what's possible with what's needed to create economic value or social good. Now, in our case, let's assume this is all about social good. Do we know what's needed? Well, I'm going to give you a lot of examples of where it's obvious what's needed. Do we know what's possible? We definitely know what's possible, because this is not rocket science. This is not invention. We don't need to invent new things. We need to change things, but we don't need to invent new things. But we don't have a system to do that. My experience in the past 10 to 15 years, and I've got a lot of experience in local enterprise partnerships and indeed in academia, working with government departments and research councils, even, that there needs to be some kind of common cause. Okay, a sense of common cause, recruited to a common cause, as my hero Harvey Milk used to say. We need to recruit you to a common cause across these groupings to work together to do structural innovation in the system. There is too much vested interest in small parts of the system, and that's got to be dealt with. Now, the only people who can do that effectively, in my opinion, are governments who strategically convene. And right now, we do not have any government that strategically convenes on the big issues, this being one of them. And it can convene in all sorts of ways, which are beautiful. Some beautiful work, by the way, some beautiful, wonderful, innovative approaches to dealing with design for age readiness. The Royal College of Art just has a magnificent group of people in the Helen Hamlin Centre doing wonderful work in the context of design. Housing solutions for age readiness. There's some magnificent social housing organizations doing work on housing design. Not enough of the big housing producers, by the way, are doing enough. There's quite a lot of European work, obviously, in the context of multi-generational spaces. There's so much going on that could be brought together properly. Right, this is what Roy thinks. Let's have a proper conversation on what that strategy for independent living should be, but government needs to be the strategic convener. We do need a market for people to access, either commissioners or consumers, but both. I can tell you that I've looked for products and services for my own mother and have not succeeded effectively in finding a marketplace. There isn't a good Amazon for seniors. There is definitely not an Amazon for independent living, but there surely could be. We need to train people. I mean, I love I talked to the Royal College of Occupational Therapists about their work, and their knowledge of technological solutions to some of the issues that are presented is arguably relatively poor, and they know that. They know about handles and baths and things, hardware, but their knowledge of software is poor, and it could be better. And that's true for many, many people in the space of supporting older people. And I think training there is really important. See, I'm allowed to say this because I'm a businessman. Make those responsible pay. I think they get away with they get away with all sorts of, I nearly said the wrong thing there, by the way, but they get away with all sorts of things which are wholly inappropriate. We need to make businesses pay. We need to make people who drinks people, tobacco people, food people, and frankly, fossil fuel people for the pollution that we need to make them pay. Now, I don't know a government that would do that, but if it was my government, I definitely would. I'd regulate them out of it, by the way. I'd either tax them, and then I'd regulate them. Businesses wouldn't die. Businesses don't die just because of tax and regulation. Believe me, I know. I'd also incentivize over 50s to engage in this area, and that you can do it in lots of ways. Tax incentives on home improvements, home modifications. You could align it with a net zero strategy for insulation and other things. There's some magnificent stuff going on in the context of reducing respiratory problems in housing by maintaining humidity correctly in houses. Very small retrofits like technology-based air bricks, just to give you one example. Why wouldn't you do that? Incentivize people to do the right thing. The World Economic Forum has said roughly the same thing, by the way. That's not too dissimilar to what I've just put on that previous chart. Where's it working? Well, this was written in a review of Scandinavian health-related strategy, not 6 months ago. Got it? And where's the happiest places in the world? Finland, Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. They're all in there, right? I mean, we're not bad at 18, I suppose, but we're not at the top, are we? You know, why wouldn't we give it a go? I'm not going to talk much about technology, but technology is an enabling feature here of things which. And I did look at it, and you're welcome to look at the report on this. It's an enabler, not a driver. It needs to be integrated, and it's all about design. And we shouldn't underestimate people. 94% of over 65s do use the internet, by the way. You'd think they didn't, but they do. You know, maybe 20 years ago they didn't, but they do now. Yeah, maybe they don't use it for everything, but they do. I'm not going to do this. We've got some principles, by the way, that relate to the use of technology for older people, and I won't talk about it now in any detail, but it's person-centric and it's preventative. You know, and by the way, it's choice-led and it's interoperable. So they all work together, including Alexa. We shouldn't underestimate the power of Alexa, by the way, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of technical solutions coming out. There's a fantastic Liverpool 5G program, which is fantastic because it lays the infrastructure for all of this. I'm optimistic about this, and there's a lot of homes work going on, but the problem is that 85% of the homes that will exist in the UK in 2045, they already exist. So we've got to talk more about retrofit and less about new homes, but new homes are part of this. Right, I've got some good news, okay? I'm going to leave you with good news. 6.7%. It might not seem a very large number, but I'm quite happy with that. That is the percentage chance of me living till I'm 100. Okay? Do you? I mean, you're underwhelmed by that. Okay? Are you underwhelmed? So come 2054, if I'm still around, 6.7% chance of me being there. This is an even better number, by the way, and it's extremely good for me as I reach my 70th birthday. That is that this is a piece done by the Health Foundation a few years ago now. 48% of over 70s still enjoy sex. Okay, so I'm reasonably pleased about that, I have to say, for a very personal reason. Also, this is Helen Mirren's quote, and I'm hoping that's true as well. Okay, and yeah, if I was like, if any of us were like Helen Mirren, that would be fantastic. But I'm hoping that 70 is awesome. So there's some optimistic numbers there for you. And look, go back to SR and G. We've got plenty of opportunities to deal with SR and G's problem. Now, I actually think G, we need to deal with G, definitely. We've got a crisis with S's, and with R's, we've still got time, probably. We'd better start daring some mighty things here, because simple incremental reform is useless. And I mean, it's useless. Even the Dilnot report on social care, from the point of view of actually making a difference, is arguably pretty useless. we better dare mighty things. We better go to glorious triumphs, even if every now and again we fail, rather than live in a grey twilight. And it will be a pretty dismal and grey twilight for a lot of people who are in that 50 to 64 age range right now, as they get older, because the system will just cripple itself. I write that up because that's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. However, it's very, very important for my football club. Okay, we want to dare some mighty things here. I don't care whether we fail now and again, but I absolutely don't want to live in the mediocrity of League One. Okay, I do want them to be in the Premier League. And that's a philosophy I bring to this. I hope that you've been challenged by what I've said about independent living, with some of the numbers that relate to it for lots of different people, because people are at the heart of this. And if we get the chance to enroll enough people in the thought that there is a gap in strategy. And by the way, the Fabian Society is just putting together the Labour Party's program for older people for their manifesto. And we are in some discussions with them on that. The fact of the matter is it has to be bold and big. Otherwise, honestly, we'll just all live longer, not better. Okay, thank you. Right, what do we do? What do we do now, Joe? I'm going to lie down. Yeah. Get that now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Roy. That was a very thought-provoking talk and very inspiring. I'd like to invite the panelists to come and join me on the stage. Are you going to sit on the end, did you say?
Yeah, I'll go sit on the other end, shall I? Okay.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to walk past here. I've just had a knee replacement, by the way, so
Don't fall off the stage.
my consultant would not be happy about me walking past here. I'll sit on the end.
You know that. Well, I'll walk this time. Don't fall off, please. No, dear. Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, thank you, Roy. That was a fantastic talk. What we're going to do now is just have a little panel talk. So we'll invite the panelists to reflect on the talk and to ask a question to Roy. And then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions too. So I will first start by, I'm not sure at the beginning whether you heard who the panelists were, so I will just briefly introduce them to you. So we have Paul Jackson at the end there, who is the chair of the AIDEN network at Oxford Brookes. So that's the AI and Data Analysis Network, also part of the business school. We have Margaret Simpson here, who is chair of the Oxford 50+ network in Oxford, and also part of our Healthy Aging Network steering group. And then we have Johnny Collett, who's also a member of our Healthy Aging steering group, and his research area is exercise and rehabilitation. And then we have Penny Fulis, who is Chief Executive of Age UK Oxfordshire, and is also on our steering group for the Healthy Aging Network. So I'll start with Penny. Would you like to just start with that? Put you on the spot there.
All right, thank you very much. So thank you very much for, you said it was going to be challenging and provoking, and I think it was. Huge amount of sympathy with a lot of what you've said. We do have a big issue with aging. Part of that issue that I'm becoming increasingly aware of is all around attitude. and attitudes to aging. And I'm interested in, and I might ask you that, I haven't decided on my question quite yet, but that might be this. I'm really interested in how we change attitudes to aging, and there are numerous examples of that. If you do what you've just done, which is put together a presentation, and you Google looking for images of aging, tap it in, Google images of aging, what comes up is adverts for wrinkle cream. So that, and there are masses of them. So, you know, you go through, you keep clicking next, you get to about the 5th page before you come to what I'm looking for, which is positive images of people in later life. So, and there is something very important about that for me, because unless Jill and Richard and all of us can embrace the fact that we are all aging, we're not going to solve those problems. I like very much your idea of an overarching strategy. I think we definitely need that. We need it at a national level. We need that at a local level as well. But I'm also interested in the micro level, the what we can achieve at a very, very local level, through perhaps the creation of more age-friendly societies, definitely through challenging aging wherever we sit. Do not buy wrinkle cream. Do not, because you are buying in to a kind of negative attitude to something that we are all at best looking forward to. So that kind of my response. I love your broad vision. I'll come and man barricades with you when you need it, because I think to achieve that, we will need to man some barricades.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. I'll say a couple of things. First of all, you're speaking to the creator of Oil of Olay Regenerist, by the way. Okay. With incredibly unique pentapeptide technology, but I'll put that to one side for a minute. And I'm going to. Your point is very well made that that attitudes need to be changed, but we need to enroll all of those people. There is a big gap in strategy, but frankly, there's an equally big gap, which is entirely capable of being filled in the context of an age-relevant brand. Think of Oil of Olay, frankly, but think of the Oil of Olay brand converted into something aspirational for all of us in the context of how we live our lives. Honestly, the best marketeers in the world, if they were given that challenge, could come up with a solution, could come up with an appropriate, powerful solution. And I know them. I know that could be done, but it's just not brought together. It needs a story. The strategy is the story, but it needs a brand. Thanks, Penny.
That was wonderful. Thank
I'll give you some
Penny.
of that stuff. It really works by me.
I'm afraid after my little outburst, I should have. I think he probably.
I can
did,
take it.
really.
You know.
Okay, so if we could pass over to Johnny. Johnny, if you'd just like to give a reflection and then ask a question.
Yeah, fantastic, Roy. It's really good to hear the data and how the data can actually open people's eyes to what's down the road. I think without data, it's quite difficult to make those points, and the data is quite scary. So that brings me on to my question to you, is what age should the strategy start? And the reason I ask that is because I'm on the Healthy Aging and Care Network, but we also do work in children. And my biggest fear is for them at the moment. And I think there's the risk that it's going to be squeezed from both ends, because we see a big reduction in physical activity. We see children already with pre-diabetes. We see policy meaning that PE gets squeezed in schools. So actually a lot of the drivers are policy decisions that are causing some of this problem. And maybe if the strategy does go from, and it's a sort of a well-used term, but cradle to grave, actually it might prevent this squeeze in the middle that I see.
It is a great question. I mean, I do have quite significant engagement with children and schools. And don't get me talking about Sure Start and the way in which we should be bringing to life a good way of thinking about their lives as early as possible. However, an aging strategy from cradle to grave, which sounds great, it's hard to create a story, because I think story is important here, that captures people if you go down that track. And I've thought about it a lot, that is there a story you can have about a sort of passport for life, you know, quality living passport for life? There might be, but the story is too hard to communicate as a change mechanism, in my opinion. So personally, because of, you know, I started with the 50 to 64 group where there is a definitive problem, which is a relatively short-term problem to be dealt with. My personal view is that if I went to a government and said to the Department for Health and Social Care, to Waitley, you need a strategy for independent living. She said, when from? I'd say 50. I'd just make that choice, while buying into issues that you are working with in the context of children, which are equally important and enormous. And I'd sit that in care, but with a different brand and a different story. Okay, that's my answer. Thank you. You're welcome.
Wonderful, thank you, Johnny. So, Margaret.
Okay,
would like
thank
to-
you. I think people that have listened this evening will be full of enthusiasm. We feel we need to get up and do something about it. Now, that will be my main question to you, is where do we take this now? We can't just do it in Oxford. It presumably needs the whole of the country, or at least it needs a good proportion of it. You said it would need to be convened by central government. I personally don't think it will happen if it's left to them. I think you need the groundswell. It has to come from the bottom. It has got to move from people like myself who are not going to see whatever is produced, delivered. It is my daughter, my son, they're in their 50s. Those, you are quite right, those are the people that we need to be looking towards now. I came to Oxford 1980, a lifetime away for many people, to produce community resources for social services. We did, and what happened? They have now been taken out. Society does not have those now. And as I did say to Ian Hudspeth at the time at which he was doing it, society is going to be the poorer for that. And I think that is the case. And I think we have to look at community support, community interest. We need to be interested in other people. Are people interested in older people? Well, they might be, but not as much as they need to be. I can go on. I'm part of that aging group. I'm well through the ages that you were talking about. I'm coming out the other side. But nevertheless, we have to try and move it forward for those that are coming up behind us. So I'm going to ask you, how do we take this forward, please?
I am a huge supporter of groundswell, by the way. I did mention my one of my heroes was Harvey Milk, who was one of the first, well, was the first gay councillor in the US in San Francisco, and his was a bottom-up a movement. It's a movement, okay. And in fact, the TAPI report on technology, one of our recommendations was a bottom-up approach to applying the principles that we identified. So I'm hugely sympathetic to that. And I tend to agree that central government is a shockingly bad place to try to kick through this sense of strategy. So I think bottom-up communities. In many cities now, there are aging well organizations and aging well ambassadors. And I think we can bring those together in a positive way. By the way, the U3A is not a bad place as well to think through that. So there's a groundswell possibility there. But I do think there's a need for some form of crystallization of action at a strategic level. Now, I'm encouraged that that may be possible in the urban environments through the mayoral offices. I know Andy Burnham is in fact, Manchester has a wonderfully coherent older person's strategic approach at a local level. It doesn't quite bring this sense of national branding and replication to bear yet, but it could. I do think that the other urban centres, Birmingham, the Northeast, Liverpool and elsewhere, could act as that kind of local engagement because they're going to have the more devolved stuff. In addition, I wouldn't underestimate the potential value of the integrated care boards, which are just being established now. There are 42 of them. They have a lot of responsibility, but one of their big responsibilities is healthy aging, which is not about hospitals. It's called out for them. So Margaret, I believe in a bottom-up approach with a coherence brought to bear with some, frankly, you need some charismatic leader of that grouping. I also believe that you need to embrace the mayoral activities. And I believe that the integrated care boards, if they've got great chairs, could have a very important part to play in this. Okay, I don't have a good answer, but that's where I think action could happen.
It's the if that bothers me.
Yeah.
It's the if. We really do have to
Yeah.
push it forward.
Thank you, Margaret. Paul, would you like to go?
Yeah, I was struck where you started off talking about being in London and the cars stopping. I left this camp a couple of years ago. I left the campus and I got on a bus to go into town, and very crowded. It was the Brooks bus, and I got on there. And this young lady got up and offered me her seat. Oh my God! Yeah, this had never happened to me before. I was so shocked. I took her up on the offer and I sat down. And so, that's.
I said no, by the way. I've said no. And then somebody said yes. And then the whole carriage said, will you sit down?
Sit down, for goodness sake. It does sort of, it does change your thinking on things. Anyway, let me rattle through a few points. I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed this evening and your talk. And I'm sort of more optimistic about the role that government nationally and locally can play. And that might be sort of slightly biased by, that I'm here because of my role in AID and the AIDEN network. But for the first decade of this century, I left academia. I worked for the body SIPFA, Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, on their business services wing. But I was working on digital projects, e-government projects, working a lot with government. And there were things going on then. It was particularly the modernization white paper that came out in '98, and then you had e-government strategies. And there were lots of things on the back of that. And a lot of that was around, yes, it was about putting digital in things, but it was about redesigning services around people. So there were lots of papers and initiatives around joining up and joining up services based on life events. These were great ideas. There was a lot of effort into, just good design. You talked about good design. There was an initiative called Total Place, looking at a physical place and all of the services, looking at the housing, getting all of the stakeholders together. And, aging and other things, were part of that. But all of the energy and all the funding for doing that obviously started to disappear come 2010. My hope is that, we've learned from the mistakes of that, and that energy can be resurrected, and we'll have a new agenda in a couple of years' time, because we've been there before 20 years ago. We can do that sort of thing again, and we can recognize, where we need to get to. A couple of other things, I've spent today sort of teaching strategy and implementing strategy. Strategy is about a number of things. It's about dealing with fragmentation. It's about focusing on priorities. So, we know how to do this, but it requires political backing. One of the other things about my time working for SIPFA and working on government projects, I got to know, you've probably heard of the Red Book. When the Chancellor sits down, he talks about the Red Book, which has all of the figures of our spending and the forecasts of what we're going to be spending in the years to come and what the revenues are going to be. And if there's a big, if there's a big hole in that, then the government is in trouble. So it usually balances, except when Liz Truss was in charge. But I don't think they updated the Red Book in those 49 days. There's also an Orange Book and a Green Book. You don't need to worry about those. I mention them because I want to suggest a Purple Book, because based on what you're saying, I think we need some national accounts that reflects the Red Book in terms of forecasts of population and what that's going to imply, particularly based on particular places. And I could go on, but I'll just finish on one point. Just in, things can be different in the way in which we run a country. And, my wife is Dutch, and, they do things differently there when it comes to census data. We have this silly census every 10 years. It takes years to analyze it. It's always out of date. It's a load of rubbish. We can't do very much with it. But, if you live in the Netherlands, as I have, you register locally. You happen to register with the police, but you could register with the local authority. They know who is where in which houses. You've got details of population. And, we're talking about data. You need data. If you've got up-to-date data, it's a requirement by law to give that data. You know who is in the area. You can start to plan and do things because you've got the information to hand to put the resources behind it. So we can do things like that. People get scared of national identity cards and registering for the police with the police. They do it in the Netherlands. They seem perfectly relaxed about it. There are things like that we could do that's acceptable to a British population, so that we've got the data. We can join up strategies if we have the political will. I think we can crack these things. We do need a different complexion of government, I suggest, in order to do that.
And I have to say, I agree. Back to Margaret's point, one thing I missed out was that I live in Scotland, and Scotland has a much smaller population, and it has much more joined up thinking between Scottish enterprise, Scottish government and innovation, the public sector and the third sector, in my opinion, because it's smaller. And that's why the mayoral thing, I think, has relevance to this. On your point, just to give you an example of something that you'd think we should know. We should know the number of people and where they live who are over 65. But equally, we should know whether or not in their places of in their houses or in their homes there are staircases, shouldn't we? Right. Have you ever tried to get that data? I've tried, by the way, and believe me, if there's one thing that I can do, it's research. And I am telling you, I have had absolutely no joy in finding out the link between the physical environment and the people of particular demographics. And I'm sure there must be an ability to do that linkage somewhere. But it requires databases to be interoperable, frankly, and manageable. And we're not there. We are there on some things. So assisted bin removal, for example, we know that. And yet the director of adult social care doesn't really seem to care much about that, because it's the director of place who really deals with that. But the fact is, we do know some of these things. But not everything which is relevant to managing or effectively incentivizing older people to do the right thing for themselves. So it's a great point that you make about data. I'm glad you're optimistic. I've got a bit of both, frankly. Anyway, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much all to the panelists. Now I'd like to open it up to questions to the audience. So we have a microphone, but we might be able to hear you if you shout, if you talk loudly.
Daniel Sharp, I was here 15 years ago at the town planner, and we're now 57,000. So I have to defend the planning to the sun.
I knew there'd be a planner in the room.
We had very good role in the past two. Role in the town. And the answer, you still the wood. You've got to start the bar. Better. What is why to the elderly?
Not working.
Oh,
Yes, we've got 27 million houses that need to be retrofitted.
Yes.
A few million of those every year can be modified to made accessible. We insulate and we heat space that we occupy, space and fabric. Because I'm so pleased. I don't like your comments about fast food,
No.
but I don't approve of lecturers who ignore net zero. So congratulations on that. And the answer to housing is subdivide and retrofit. And every house subdivided is one less new house with its embodied carbon.
Yeah. Who should do that, by the way?
The planning system. But the problem with the planning system is we've had 16 ministers in 10 years.
And who is going to pay for that subdivision and retrofitting?
The council give grants, the government give grants, no subsidies to the private building sector. It all goes to retrofit. And if it costs, then you charge the property. And when it's sold, you take the money back and recycle it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you, by the way. I mean, I drive past a new housing development and I went in and looked at it, and through the eyes of someone interested in aging innovation. And it was a complete disgrace. I mean, it was I'm not going to tell you the house builder, but it was one of the major UK house builders. And it looked as if it had been, the architect had been somebody just out of architectural school. And it had absolutely no sense of what multi-generational opportunity in it, because it's just not part of their building sort of criteria. Right, power to the well. That's a very interesting topic. I'd love to think about that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have another question. Yeah.
I'm really glad I went after you now, because my question is pretty similar in the sense that I'm wondering to what extent are you kind of connecting with other groups that maybe have a similar suggestions, but
Yeah.
a different focus. So the report on creating healthy cities
Yeah.
came out over the summer, and one of the big suggestions was £10 billion spent on improving the 3.5 million poor homes. They thought that it would pay for itself in 7 years in terms of NHS savings.
Yeah.
There was the Catapult pilot study on heating by prescription, and they found that the cost per person in the pilot was about 4.6 times cheaper than the equivalent cost
Yeah.
per person not in the pilot. These are tangible things. Are they being linked
Yes.
up?
Let me deal with this. What I've said tonight isn't unique by any means. However, and that there are probably, even in the time that I've been dealing with this in the past, 8 years, 40 reports with 20 recommendations in each report in the context of each of the topic areas that I've described, and indeed more. The problem is they've got no landing place. This is a system question, not an ideas question. And it is my opinion that we need to act on the system, and there isn't anybody acting on the system. So I have good friends at the ILC, the International Longevity Council. I've got friends at the Centre for Aging Better. I've got friends in the APPGs in housing. So Richard Best runs the APPG on housing. But the sense of coherent, crystallized strategy doesn't exist because there are vested interests across the piece. And my view is that that's where we've got to change things, because the reports they're all there. There's some beautiful reports as well, by the way. Some of them are wonderful to read, and they're very inspiring, but they're not. No one's put any kind of activity behind them. So my answer to Margaret is where I think we probably need to focus: a bottom-up movement and an activity at the mayoral, at the sort of combined authority level, where there's sufficient scope, but without the ridiculous bureaucratic scale that exists, particularly in the English context.
I will say, just in terms of the Creating Healthy Cities report, I know that they did create a local government toolkit because there was recognition that getting it through central government was, not exactly certain.
Thank you. I'll take I'm sure I've read it, but I'll take another look at that. I should also say, by the way, that the Catapult's work is quite interesting. So I've been involved in some stuff with the Connected Cities Catapult in the context of healthy aging quite recently. It's good, but of course, as with everything in this context, there are more pilots than there are in British Airways, to use a phrase, not mine, by the way. And that's a big problem, because pilots are not, we need to replicate quick. We need to take the best practice and replicate quick. By the way, that does happen in Sweden. It does happen in the Netherlands, in my opinion. But it doesn't happen here.
Wonderful.
Thank you for the question.
Good evening, panel. Roy, really enjoyed the contribution so far. I could see my optimistic DNA growing throughout your presentation, Roy. And as I started to formulate my question, it started to get slightly smaller, and the pessimistic one was growing. I'm Philip Provenzano, Assistant Director at the Institute of Public Care here at Oxford Brookes, and we work at the interface of health and social care. And over the last year, certainly I've been doing lots of work with the integrated care boards, and prior to that, integrated systems. And I think for me, it's the elephant in my room is the NHS. And whilst you've had questions about where do you place the custodianship of a strategy, the question is, the NHS, is that going to be an advocate, a supporter?
Yeah.
Because I see certainly at that health and social care interface, there's a certain lack of parity between not only just social care, but local government, of which many of the things that you've described are part and parcel, and the NHS. And the NHS, and these are my views, not necessarily the views of the Institute of Public Care, slightly bullied in certain environments, and their ability to either play that game or engage in that sort of strategies, I think is fairly fundamental. So,
well, it's a great
your
question,
view.
and I'll just give you one story. Put the ICBs to one side for a minute, okay? Because in theory, they have a responsibility for doing some of the things that I've been mentioning. But if they only knew if they only grasped it properly. The NHS is quite interesting. The question always in this context is, what's in it for them? Okay. Now, a very good friend of mine is the chair of an NHS Foundation Trust in the northeast of England. And I put my foot in the door and said, can I have an hour with you? And she's very busy, but she said yes. And I had an hour basically ranting about the fact that her problems result from before her problems. And if she just got everybody to recognize that in her NHS Foundation Trust, then their focus, at least in part, could be in the context of communication, because I mentioned that there, to people about hospital and what it's for and what it's not for. She told me, by the way, one very interesting fact that has to do with literacy and the ability of the population at large to really grasp some of the concepts of prevention, that it's really an important point, prevention. However, when I came out of that room, she acted. The problem we've got is that there isn't enough of those conversations going on, it seems to me. So she acted in her city and in her sort of city region. But in the next city region, I'd have to go and talk to them as well. And that's why I think there's got to be a sort of strategic narrative at a bigger level than just an individual going in and persuading them. Do I think that they should? Do I think there's something in it for them? Well, I do. And I think if you just tell them, then they'll recognize very quickly, right now, that there's something in it for them. They've got 13,000. She had, by the way, about 300 bed blockers, to use an awful term, in her hospital. We were sitting in a hospital where 300 people didn't need to be there. Well, it's a crisis. I mean, it's an absolute crisis. So is there something for them? Yes. Is it now? Yes. Now's the time to strike.
There does need to be something around the use of the language that we use, and I don't. You mentioned the word outcome in your discussion, but I know your work, and that is something that obviously features large. But there's the 13, 100, however many beds. And reducing bed blockers, or reducing the number of people who are waiting to be discharged from hospital, is a number. It's not an outcome.
Correct.
And I think there is until we start, wherever we're talking about housing, or if we're talking about health, or we're talking about social care, I think we still have this difference of opinion as to what constitutes value for that system.
Very fair point. We could chat a lot more, by the way. I'll just make one further point on your point. We have terrible transactions. There's a particularly bad transaction, by the way, between NHS and social care private providers, because the private providers simply will not take some of those people, because the private providers are there to make money and the NHS is trying to do the best, frankly, at the end of the day, to do the best thing for the individual. And my view on social care, we've not come to tonight, but I think that reducing that terrible transaction that can exist, inefficiency between a hospital and the potential place in which that individual would go, so difficult. But thank you. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't have all the answers, obviously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm very aware of time, so I think we're going to wrap it up there. Yes, of course you can, Margaret. Margaret's going to ask one more question.
You've been round, I presume, other areas of the country, make it very similar. Right, okay. Now that you've been to the other areas, what are you doing about the experts by experience? How are you involving them? Because if you can tick the box that the experts, which are the older people, who can advise the younger people what they need to be thinking about, how are you involving them, please?
Well, I have one particular, look, I'm retired, okay? I'm retired. And so I sit in a major city in a deprived area of the northeast. I live in Scotland, but I live, my heart is in Sunderland, and I sit on the Ageing Well board there. One of the very interesting things, Margaret, is we've got 115 ageing ambassadors, and these are people who are in the community, in many different bits of the community, and they bring the messages that we wish to give about falls prevention, about exercise, about food. And by the way, there are some wonderful little food companies knocking around that show people how to do the right thing. We bring them to the community through those ambassadors. Now that's an example. Personally, that's in one city, but it's not in the next city. And I don't know what to do about that, because I can't go, we can't, the reapplication of best practice is not a given in our system. It actually is in some other European systems, but it's not in our system. And maybe through bodies like the LGA, I don't know, or ADAS, which is the Directors of Adult Social Care, there would be a route to get reapplication, but I don't know. But what I do know is that in the place that I operate, ageing ambassadors are absolutely crucial to the messaging to people in localities, in neighborhoods. Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up now, but I'd just like us all to say a big thank you to Roy and to our panel members. So if we can, a round of applause for them.